Shalom. Today, I want to talk about the myth of being fearless. The idea that a man can live without fear has steered too many of our young brothers towards paths that end far too soon. This lie, woven deeply into the fabric of our culture, tells us that acknowledging fear is a sign of weakness. It's a pressure that suffocates the truth of our humanity, driven by dread of being labeled pusillanimous or cowardly in the eyes of others. Yet the truth stands clear and unassailable. Absolute fearlessness is a fantasy. Every loving father understands this deeply. As our children grow, it feels as if our very own hearts walk outside of our bodies, vulnerable and exposed. We understand that when Yah instructs us to fear not, his intent isn't to render us fearless, but rather to ensure that fear never shakes our faith in him. If Yahuwah intended for us to be fearless, he wouldn't have declared in Proverbs 9:10 that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. Here we see clearly that Yahuwah, or fearing Yahuwah, is a call to trusting him deeply, or trusting in his divine oversight, not our own strength to be fearless. True courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about facing it head on and moving through it. This understanding shatters the illusion for a man to be strong. He must first be unbreakable or wear an unbreakable mask of stoicism. So beware of the masters of machismo who are novices in manhood. Their tunnel-visioned pursuit of an image of fearlessness can have dire consequences, oftentimes fatal. My heart grieves for the young lives in my community lost to this deception. I remember a young man I had once mentored had confided in one of his friends about his fear of attending a party where some boys he had conflict with would be there. Unfortunately, he wasn't encouraged to process that fear, but was told that he would be a hoe if he didn't attend the party. Choosing his reputation over his own safety, he walked into a situation he knew was dangerous, a decision that eventually cost him his life. He was shot and killed. This tragedy underscores a painful reality that for some boys and men, the fear of being seen as a coward can be worse than death itself. The biblical history of the warrior Barak and the prophet Deborah is a great example of when a man feels fear but doesn't succumb to it. I'll be reading from my book Battle Cry, but for full context, you should read Judges chapter 4. I'll start on this page. Consider the biblical account of Deborah and Barak. Deborah was a prophet as well as a judge who settled disputes between the Israelites. Barak was a military commander whose name meant lightning. These two individuals lived at a time when the nation's disobedience to Yah brought about the Canaanites' oppressive rule over the Israelites for 20 years. One day the Most High told Deborah to summon Barak and tell him that the Most High was commanding him to assemble 10,000 men of Israel to go and fight the Canaanite army. If Barak obeyed, Yahuwah promised that Israel would be victorious. Although Barak was a warrior, he lacked courage in this milestone moment. He told Deborah, "If you go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." Deborah agreed to accompany Barak, but told him that since he would not go as Yah commanded, the honor for the battle would be given to a woman. Then Deborah arose courageously and went with Barak to fight the Canaanite army. As promised, the Most High gave Israel a great victory that day. Many men downplay Barak's fear as a simple lack of faith in Yah, But let's look at this in context. Although Barak led an army of 10,000 men, the Canaanite army had the distinct advantage of 900 iron chariots, considered by historians as tanks of that day. Barak feared this moment so much so that he was not only willing to be the first commander to take a woman into war, but also he didn't even think twice about Deborah being given the honor for the victory. Barak was scared, and through his actions or lack thereof, he admitted it to himself and to Deborah, which I personally find commendable. For all we know, it may have taken more courage for him to admit his fear than it would have to head into battle without Deborah. As men, we have a choice when fear arises. We can either be courageous enough to tell the truth, or we can risk dire consequences by pretending we're not afraid. Men, we know our egos can cloud cognitive clarity, making us confuse recklessness for courage. If we only encouraged our boys and younger men to embrace fear as a guide rather than shame them into silence, we might see more choices that lead to longer, fuller lives. The great Nelson Mandela once said that the brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So when we think about bravery or courage, we can think about it in terms of taking the right action despite the fear we feel. It's essential, men, particularly fathers, to model or maturely model how to process and overcome fear, demonstrating that it's natural to feel fear and that bravery lies in acknowledging and confronting it, not in denying its existence. Here are 2 essential steps I use to start transforming my approach to fear. Number 1, boldly challenge the cultural myth of fearlessness by first admitting your fears to yourself. Then when you mature in this area, share them with someone you can trust. I recall the first time I shared one of my fears with my wife. It was very liberating, to say the least. In the presence of a woman who is both emotionally intelligent and mature, we should not fear, or there shouldn't be a need to worry about her respect for us diminishing. Rather, it really should flourish. We should actually feel better about ourselves, that we're not trying to be something that we're not, and that is a superhero. And unfortunately, as I share many times, many men are still wearing capes that are strangling the life out of them. It takes courage for a man to be transparent and break free from emotional incarceration. And number 2, mentor boys and younger men in your community, guiding them to feel and navigate through fears constructively and spiritually, rather than succumbing to the cultural pressure to ignore and repress their fears. When we debunk the falsehoods of manhood, we open the door for our boys to embrace the comprehensive understanding of what it truly means to be a man. So let's foster an environment where feeling fear is not seen as weakness, but as a process that leads to a more authentic version of courage. Shalom.